The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Windsor Castle, as Sergeant James Mitchell adjusted his red tunic one final time. 23 years he had served as a Queen's Guard, standing motionless for hours, enduring tourists, jokes and cameras flashing in his face. Today felt different somehow, though he couldn't explain why. At precisely 9:30 a.m., James took his position outside the castle gates. His black bearskin hat sat perfectly aligned, his rifle held at the regulation angle. Within minutes, the usual crowd gathered. Children pointed and giggled, adults snapped selfies, and tour guides rattled off facts about the ceremonial duties. But then something caught his eye. A small boy, no more than 7 years old, stood apart from the crowd. Unlike the others who were laughing and making faces, this child watched with intense curiosity. The boy had bright blue eyes and wore a simple school uniform that looked well-worn but clean. What struck James most was the boy's expression of genuine wonder and respect. The child approached slowly, his small hands clasped behind his back, in perfect imitation of military bearing. He stopped exactly 3 feet away and stood completely still, mirroring James's posture as best he could. No giggling, no silly faces, just quiet admiration. Hours passed, and other tourists came and went, but the little boy remained. He never spoke, never tried to make James break character, never even smiled. He simply stood there sharing in the solemnity of the guard's duty. James found himself oddly moved by this young stranger's behavior. As the afternoon shift change approached, James noticed the boy's mother finally approaching. She was a young woman, probably in her 20s, wearing a nurse's uniform beneath her coat. Dark circles under her eyes suggested long hours at work, but her face lit up when she saw her son. She whispered something to the boy, who nodded seriously. Together they stepped back to give James space as the changing of the guard ceremony began. James executed every movement with extra precision, somehow wanting to honor this small observer who had shown such respect. During the brief moment when guards pass each other, James caught the boy's eye. For just an instant, barely perceptible to anyone watching, James gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement. The boy's face broke into the most radiant smile James had ever seen. As his replacement took position, James began his measured march, away from the post, but something made him glance back. The little boy had drawn himself up to his full height and delivered a perfect salute, holding it until James had disappeared around the corner. That evening, James couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. In over 2 decades of service, thousands of people had watched him stand guard. Some were respectful, others were not. But none had affected him quite like this silent little observer. There was something pure about the child's admiration, something that reminded James why he had chosen this path in the first place. The next morning, James arrived early for his shift, secretly hoping the boy might return. As he took his position, he scanned the gathering crowd, but there was no sign of the small figure in the school uniform. The day passed normally, filled with the usual tourists and their cameras, but James found himself missing his quiet companion. 3 days later, just as James was beginning to think he would never see the boy again, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the crowd. The child was back, this time holding his mother's hand. But something was different. The boy was wearing what looked like a miniature military uniform, complete with tiny medals that caught the morning light. The mother approached cautiously, clearly nervous about breaking protocol. She leaned down and whispered something to her son, who nodded gravely. Then, to James's surprise, she guided the boy forward until they were standing directly in front of him. The woman cleared her throat softly and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper, meant only for James's ears. Her words would change everything. James thought he knew about duty, respect, and the true meaning of service. But those words and what happened next would unfold in the days to come, creating a story that would eventually touch hearts far beyond the castle walls. Sarah Henderson's hands trembled slightly as she stood before the imposing guard. Her son Tommy had talked about nothing else for 3 days straight after their first visit to Windsor Castle. She had watched him practice standing at attention, in their tiny flat mimicking the guard's posture with the seriousness only a 7-year-old could muster. "Excuse me," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible above the chatter of other tourists. "My son Tommy has something he wanted to ask you. I know you can't break character, but maybe you could just listen?" James remained perfectly still, but Sarah noticed the slightest softening around his eyes. She gently nudged Tommy forward, and the boy stepped up with the confidence of someone 3 times his age. "Sir," Tommy began, his voice clear and respectful, "my daddy was a soldier too. He died when I was 4, but Mummy says he was very brave. She says you're brave too, standing here protecting everyone. I wanted to tell you thank you." The words hit James like a physical blow. He had been prepared for the usual tourist interactions, maybe a joke or a request for a photo, but not this raw, honest tribute from a child who understood loss far too early. Tommy continued, reaching into his pocket. "Daddy left me his medals, but Mummy says I should give one to another brave soldier. Would you accept this? You can't take it now because you're working, but maybe after?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she watched her son's earnest face. The past 3 years since her husband David's death had been incredibly difficult, working double shifts at the hospital to make ends meet, raising Tommy alone, dealing with her own grief while trying to be strong for her son. But moments like this reminded her that David's values lived on in their boy. James felt his throat tighten. In his peripheral vision, he could see other tourists beginning to notice the interaction. A few had their phones out, recording what they probably thought was just another cute moment with a guard. But James knew this was something entirely different. The changing of the guard wasn't scheduled for another 2 hours, but James found himself hoping his commanding officer might understand if he needed to address this situation properly. The medal Tommy held was clearly precious, likely one of the few tangible connections the boy had to his father. As if sensing James's internal struggle, Sarah spoke again. "We'll wait until you're finished with your duty. Tommy insisted we stay. He says a soldier never leaves his post and he wants to do this right." For the next hour and 45 minutes, Tommy and Sarah stood to the side, never leaving, never complaining about the wait. Tommy practiced his posture, occasionally glancing at James for confirmation that he was doing it correctly. Other tourists came and went, but the little boy remained focused on his mission. When the relief guard finally arrived for the changing ceremony, James performed every movement with extra precision, knowing he had a very special audience. As the ceremony concluded and James stepped away from his post, he saw Tommy straighten up, ready for what he clearly considered the most important moment of his young life. James approached the boy and his mother, removing his bearskin hat as he did so. The simple gesture caused a ripple of surprise through the nearby crowd. Royal Guards rarely removed their ceremonial headwear in public, and never for unofficial interactions with tourists. "Young man," James said, his voice gentle, but carrying the authority of his years of service, "I would be deeply honored to accept your father's medal." Tommy's face lit up with joy, but he maintained his serious demeanor. With ceremony that would have made any drill sergeant proud, the 7-year-old presented a small military commendation medal, holding it out with both hands. James accepted it with equal formality, studying the inscription. "Lieutenant David Henderson, Distinguished Service Medal," he read aloud. "Your father was indeed a brave man, Tommy. I can see he raised a brave son too." What happened next surprised everyone, including James himself. Without thinking about protocol or regulations, he knelt down to Tommy's eye level, bringing himself into the boy's world rather than towering above it. "This medal will have a place of honor in my quarters," James promised. "And I want you to know something important. Your father's bravery lives on in you. The way you've honored his memory today, the respect you've shown for service and duty, that's what real courage looks like." The crowd around them had grown silent, sensing they were witnessing something significant. Phones were still recording, but the atmosphere had shifted from casual entertainment to genuine respect for the moment unfolding. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her son's dream come true. For months, he had carried that medal, everywhere, talking about finding the right soldier to give it to. She had worried it was just a child's fantasy, but here was this imposing guard, treating her son's gift with the reverence it deserved. But the story was far from over. As James stood up and prepared to return to his duties, neither he nor the Henderson family could have imagined how this simple exchange would soon capture the attention of people around the world, or how it would lead to an even more extraordinary moment of connection between strangers bound by respect, loss, and the enduring power of human kindness. Emma Watson had been working as a tourist guide at Windsor Castle for 15 years, but she had never seen anything like what unfolded that Tuesday morning. As she led her group of 30 visitors toward the main gates, she noticed the unusual gathering around one of the Queen's guards. "What's happening over there?" asked Mrs. Chen, an elderly tourist from Singapore who had saved for years to visit Britain. Emma squinted through the crowd and saw something that made her heart skip. The guard was kneeling down, speaking to a small boy while the child's mother looked on with tears streaming down her face. In all her years at the castle, Emma had never seen a guard break protocol like this. "Ladies and gentlemen," Emma announced to her group, "I think we're witnessing something very special. Let's move closer, but please be respectful." As they approached, Emma could hear fragments of the conversation. The guard was accepting something from the boy, holding it with the kind of reverence usually reserved for state ceremonies. The crowd around them had grown quiet, phones capturing every moment. Michael Rodriguez, a photographer who had come to Windsor hoping to get some standard tourist shots, found himself focusing his camera on the scene with growing excitement. As a former military man himself, he recognized the significance of what was happening. This wasn't just a photo opportunity. This was a genuine moment of human connection, transcending the usual barriers of ceremony and protocol. "Sarah, look at this," whispered Jennifer Mitchell to her teenage daughter, who was initially more interested in her phone than the castle tour. "That little boy is giving something to the guard. Look how seriously the soldier is taking it, under eye." Mitchell, despite being 16 and generally unimpressed by adult emotions, found herself captivated. The guard's careful attention to the child, the way he knelt down to the boy's level, the obvious respect he showed for whatever gift he was receiving, it all seemed to contradict everything she thought she knew about these ceremonial soldiers. "Is he allowed to do that, Mom?" Sarah whispered. Jennifer shrugged but smiled. "I don't know the rules, love. But some things are more important than rules." Meanwhile, James was acutely aware that his actions were being observed and recorded by dozens of people. Part of him wondered what his superiors would say about this deviation from protocol. But looking into Tommy's earnest face, seeing the pride in the boy's eyes as his gift was accepted with such dignity, James knew he had made the right choice. Dr. Patricia Williams, a child psychologist who happened to be visiting the castle with her own family, watched the interaction with professional interest. She could see the profound impact this moment was having on the young boy. The validation he was receiving from this figure of authority, the way his gesture was being treated as meaningful and important, would likely stay with him for the rest of his life. "David, are you getting this?" Patricia whispered to her husband, who was recording the scene on his phone. "Every second," David replied. "This is something special." As James stood up and carefully placed Tommy's father's medal in his breast pocket, the crowd began to applaud spontaneously. It started with just one person, then spread through the gathered tourists like a wave. Even the usually stoic castle staff nearby found themselves clapping. Tommy, overwhelmed by the attention, stepped closer to his mother but maintained his military bearing. Sarah Henderson felt a surge of pride watching her son handle the moment with such maturity. She knew David would have been so proud of their boy. But then something unexpected happened. From the crowd, an elderly gentleman stepped forward. He was wearing a military blazer with several medals of his own, walking with the aid of a cane but carrying himself with unmistakable dignity. "Excuse me, young man," the elderly gentleman addressed Tommy directly. "I'm Colonel William Barnes, retired. I served with the RAF for 35 years. I want to shake your hand if I may." Tommy looked up at his mother, who nodded encouragingly. The boy stepped forward and shook the colonel's hand with the seriousness the moment deserved. "What you just did," Colonel Barnes continued, his voice carrying the weight of decades of military experience, "showed more understanding of honor and service than many people twice your age. Your father would be very proud." James watched this exchange with growing amazement. What had started as a simple interaction between him and one small boy was becoming something much larger. Other veterans in the crowd began to step forward, each wanting to acknowledge Tommy's gesture. A woman wearing a Help for Heroes t-shirt approached Sarah. "I lost my brother in Afghanistan," she said quietly. "Seeing your son honor his father's memory like this and watching that guard treat it with such respect, it means more than you know." Emma, the tour guide, found herself fighting back tears as she watched the scene unfold. In 15 years of leading tourists around the castle, she had seen thousands of interactions with the guards. Most were lighthearted, some were silly, a few were disrespectful. But this was something entirely different. This was a reminder of what the guards truly represented, beyond the pageantry and tourist attraction. Michael the photographer continued, capturing every moment, but he was beginning to realize he was documenting something that might resonate far beyond this single morning at Windsor Castle. The images he was taking showed something pure and powerful about human connection, respect, and the ways that strangers can touch each other's lives in unexpected moments. As the crowd began to disperse, many people approached Sarah and Tommy to share their own stories of loss, service, and remembrance. What had started as a simple desire by a 7-year-old to honor his father's memory had created a spontaneous community of people connected by respect for sacrifice and service. James returned to his ceremonial duties, but the medal in his pocket seemed to carry special weight. He had no way of knowing that the photos and videos being taken that morning would soon spread far beyond Windsor Castle, touching hearts around the world and inspiring others to their own acts of unexpected kindness and recognition. The day was far from over, and the ripple effects of Tommy's brave gesture were just beginning to spread in ways that would surprise everyone involved. By evening, Michael Rodriguez's photographs had found their way onto social media, shared first by his wife Maria, then picked up by friends, and spreading rapidly across platforms. The image that captured everyone's attention showed James kneeling before Tommy, accepting the medal with both hands while the boy stood at perfect attention. The caption Maria had written was simple. "Today at Windsor Castle, a 7-year-old boy honored his fallen father by giving his medal to a Queen's Guard." The guard's response restored my faith in humanity. Within hours, the post had been shared thousands of times. Comments poured in from around the world, each person touched by the image in their own way. "This is what respect looks like," wrote someone from Australia. "Both the boy and the guard understood something beautiful about honor," commented a user from Canada. "As a veteran myself, this brought me to tears," shared someone from the United States. Sarah Henderson was completely unaware of the online sensation as she tucked Tommy into bed that night. They lived in a small flat in South London, and their evening routine was simple and quiet. But Tommy was more animated than usual, reliving every moment of his encounter with the guard. "Mummy, do you think Daddy would have liked Sergeant Mitchell?" Tommy asked as Sarah pulled his blanket up to his chin. "I think Daddy would have been very proud of you today, sweetheart," Sarah replied, smoothing his hair. "And yes, I think he would have liked the sergeant very much. Can we go back and visit him again?" "We'll see, love. Maybe someday." Meanwhile, across London in his military quarters, James Mitchell was having a very different kind of evening. His commanding officer, Major Thompson, had called him in for a discussion about the day's events. "Mitchell," Major Thompson said, settling behind his desk, "I've been hearing some interesting stories about your conduct today." James straightened, unsure whether he was about to be commended or reprimanded. "Sir, I can explain," Major Thompson held up a hand. "Before you say anything, I want you to know that I've been fielding calls all evening. Seems some photographs from today have gotten quite a bit of attention online." The Major turned his computer screen toward James, showing him Michael's photograph that was now being shared across multiple news websites. The image was striking. A decorated soldier in full ceremonial dress, kneeling before a small boy, accepting what was clearly a precious gift with profound respect. "The castle's public relations department has been contacted by several news organizations," Major Thompson continued. "They want to know more about the guard who broke protocol to honor a fallen soldier's son." James felt his stomach drop. Sir, I know I deviated from standard procedures, but Mitchell, the major interrupted. What you did today exemplified everything our regiment stands for. That little boy understood something about service and sacrifice that many adults never grasp. Your response honored not just his father's memory, but the values we're sworn to uphold. The relief on James's face was evident. Thank you, sir. However, Major Thompson continued, this attention means we need to handle things properly. The media interest is significant, and the castle administration wants to ensure we respond appropriately. Meanwhile, the story was reaching people in unexpected places. In a military hospital in Birmingham, Corporal Lisa Davies was recovering from injuries sustained in a training accident when her sister showed her the viral photograph on her phone. Look at this, Lisa. This little boy gave his dad's medal to a Queen's Guard. Look how respectfully the guard is treating him. Lisa studied the image, noting the care in the guard's posture, the seriousness on the child's face. Having lost 3 colleagues in her last deployment, she understood the weight of what she was seeing. That guard knows exactly what that medal means, Lisa said quietly. And that little boy, he's honoring his father the best way he knows how. In Scotland, retired Sergeant Major Robert MacLeod was having his morning coffee when his daughter called from London. Dad, you need to see this story that's all over the internet. It's about a boy and a Queen's Guard. Robert pulled up the article on his tablet, reading about Tommy's gesture and James's response. As someone who had served for 30 years and understood the weight of tradition and protocol, Robert was moved by the guard's decision to step outside formal procedure to honor the child's gift. That's what good leadership looks like, he told his daughter, knowing when the spirit of service is more important than the letter of regulation. Back at Windsor Castle, the day shift guards were buzzing with talk about the incident. Some were curious about how the administration would respond. Others were proud that their regiment had been shown in such a positive light. Guard Andrew Phillips, who had been on duty nearby during the morning's events, approached James as they prepared for the evening briefing. Mitchell, I saw what happened today. That was beautifully handled, mate. The way you honored that boy and his father's service, it reminded all of us why we do this job. By the end of the week, the story had been picked up by major news outlets across Britain and internationally. Television producers were calling, wanting to arrange interviews. The castle's visitor numbers had increased as people hoped to see the guard who had shown such respect to a child's tribute. But perhaps the most significant development was happening in living rooms and community centers around the country, where the story was inspiring others to think about how they could show respect and recognition in their own communities. In Manchester, a group of schoolchildren decided to write letters to local veterans. In Cardiff, a woman was inspired to finally visit her grandfather's war memorial. In Edinburgh, a military family decided to organize a tribute event for fallen soldiers. Tommy Henderson's simple desire to honor his father was creating ripples of respect and remembrance far beyond what anyone could have imagined. And at the center of it all was a moment of genuine human connection that transcended the usual boundaries between strangers, showing the world what true respect and dignity looked like in action. The story was far from over, and the most surprising developments were yet to come. 3 weeks after the viral moment at Windsor Castle, Sarah Henderson was working her usual night shift at St. Thomas Hospital when her supervisor approached with an unusual request. Sarah, there's someone here who wants to speak with you. Says, it's about your son and something that happened at Windsor Castle? Confused and slightly worried, Sarah made her way to the hospital's main reception area. There she found a well-dressed woman in her 50s, accompanied by a man in a military uniform she didn't recognize. Mrs. Henderson? I'm Catherine Walsh from the royal family's private office, and this is Colonel James Stewart, representing the household division. We were hoping we could have a few minutes of your time. Sarah's first thought was that Tommy had somehow gotten into trouble for his interaction with the guard. Is everything all right? Did we do something wrong? Quite the opposite, Colonel, Stewart assured her with a warm smile. Your son's gesture has touched many people, including some very senior members of the royal family. We're here with a rather unusual invitation. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work for the first time in over a year. She and Tommy sat in their small kitchen, staring at an official envelope that had arrived by special courier. Inside was an invitation that neither of them could quite believe was real. The Lord Chamberlain is commanded by Her Majesty to invite Master Thomas Henderson and Mrs. Sarah Henderson to a private ceremony recognizing acts of respect and service, to be held at Buckingham Palace. Tommy, who had been unusually quiet since his mother explained what the invitation meant, finally spoke up. "Mummy, does this mean the Queen wants to meet me?" "It seems that way, sweetheart." "Are you nervous?" Tommy considered this carefully. Little bit. But I think Daddy would want me to be brave." Meanwhile, James Mitchell was having his own extraordinary week. The medal Tommy had given him now sat in a place of honor in his quarters, but it had also led to something entirely unexpected. The story of his interaction with Tommy had reached the ears of Lieutenant David Henderson's former commanding officer, who had contacted James with information that would prove deeply meaningful to the Henderson family. Sergeant Mitchell, Major. General Patricia Williams had said during their phone call, "Lieutenant Henderson served under me in Afghanistan. He was an exceptional officer and a good man. I have something I think his family should have, but I've never known how to reach them. Your story has given me that opportunity." The day of the palace ceremony arrived with typical London drizzle, but nothing could dampen Tommy's excitement. He wore his best clothes, a navy blue suit his mother had splurged on for the occasion, and he carried himself with the same serious dignity he had shown at Windsor Castle. James Mitchell was also invited to attend, and he met the Henderson family in the palace's reception area. Tommy's face lit up when he saw the familiar guard in his dress uniform. "Sergeant Mitchell, did you bring Daddy's medal?" "I certainly did, Tommy. It's been with me every day since you gave it to me." The ceremony itself was intimate, held in one of the palace's smaller reception rooms. Only about 20 people were present, including several other individuals being recognized for various acts of service and kindness. But when Tommy was called forward, the room fell completely silent. The senior royal who presided over the ceremony knelt down to Tommy's level, much as James had done at Windsor Castle. "Tommy, I understand you honored your father's memory by sharing his medal with one of our guards. That was a very grown-up thing to do." "Thank you, Your Majesty. Daddy always said soldiers should help each other. Your daddy was absolutely right. And I have something special for you." From a velvet box, she produced a medal Tommy had never seen before. "This is the Elizabeth Cross. It's given to families of servicemen and women who have died in service to their country. Your father earned this, and you and your mother deserve to have it." As Tommy accepted the medal with the same careful reverence he had shown at Windsor Castle, Sarah found herself overwhelmed with emotion. For 3 years, she had struggled to help her son understand his father's sacrifice while dealing with her own grief and the practical challenges of single parenthood. This moment validated everything David had stood for. But the surprises weren't finished. Major General Williams stepped forward, carrying a leather portfolio. "Mrs. Henderson, Tommy, I served with your father in Afghanistan. He spoke of you both, constantly, and he would have been so proud of the young man Tommy is becoming." She opened the portfolio to reveal photographs, letters, and documents Sarah had never seen. "These are some of your father's personal effects that were returned to the unit, rather than his family by mistake. Letters he wrote but never sent, photographs he took, and something very special." The general produced a small journal, clearly well-worn from handling. "Your father kept this diary throughout his deployment. On every single page he wrote something about you, Tommy, or something he wanted to teach you when he came home." Tommy's eyes grew wide as he carefully opened the journal to see his father's handwriting. On the first page, in David's careful script, was written, "For my son Tommy, so he knows his daddy thought about him every single day." James Mitchell, watching this reunion of a family with memories they never knew existed, felt honored to have played a small part in bringing this moment about. The medal Tommy had given him had not just created a viral moment, it had opened doors to healing and connection that might never have existed otherwise. As the ceremony concluded and the family prepared to leave, Tommy approached James one more time. "Sergeant Mitchell, I'm glad I gave you Daddy's medal. I think it helped bring us here. I'm glad too, Tommy. And I want you to know that your father's medal will always remind me that real courage isn't just about being strong. Sometimes it's about being kind and doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. Sarah shook James's hand, tears in her eyes. Thank you. Not just for accepting Tommy's gift, but for treating it, and him, with such respect. You helped him honor his father's memory in a way I never could have managed alone. As the Henderson family left Buckingham Palace, they carried with them not just new honors and recovered memories, but a renewed sense of connection to David's legacy and the values he had died defending. Tommy's simple act of respect had grown into something none of them could have imagined, proving that sometimes the smallest gestures can create the most meaningful changes in the world. But even this extraordinary day was not the end of the story that had begun with a 7-year-old boy's desire to honor his father's memory. 6 months later, Windsor Castle had become an unexpected pilgrimage site for families touched by military loss. Word had spread through military communities and veteran organizations about the Guard who had honored a child's tribute with such dignity. People traveled from across Britain and beyond, hoping to pay their own respects and perhaps witness similar moments of connection. Sarah Henderson had returned to her nursing duties, but life had changed in ways both small and profound. The journal Major General Williams had returned contained not just David's thoughts about Tommy, but detailed letters he had written to be opened on Tommy's future birthdays, graduation, and other milestones. Tommy now had a roadmap of his father's love that would guide him through the years ahead. More importantly for their day-to-day life, the media attention following the palace ceremony had connected Sarah with other military families in similar situations. She had joined a support group for single parents of children who had lost military fathers and mothers, finding the community she hadn't realized she desperately needed. James Mitchell's life had also been transformed in unexpected ways. The viral story had led to his promotion to color sergeant, but more significantly, it had opened his eyes to the impact that small acts of recognition could have. He had started volunteering with military charities in his off-duty hours, using his story to encourage other veterans to share their experiences with younger generations. The medal Tommy had given him remained in his quarters, but it had been joined by letters from children around the world who had seen the story and been inspired to honor their own family members' service. James had become an unofficial ambassador for the idea that respect and recognition didn't require grand gestures, just genuine acknowledgement of others' contributions. But perhaps the most significant development had occurred completely outside the spotlight. Inspired by Tommy's story, schools across Britain had begun implementing programs connecting children with local veterans and active military personnel. The Henderson Initiative, as it became known in educational circles, encouraged young people to learn about service and sacrifice through direct interaction with those who had experienced it. At Tommy's own school in South London, the program had brought remarkable changes. Veterans came in monthly to speak with students not just about military service, but about the values of dedication, teamwork, and putting others before yourself. Tommy had become something of a celebrity among his classmates, but more importantly, he had become a bridge between generations. One particularly moving school session featured Colonel William Barnes, the elderly gentleman who had approached Tommy at Windsor Castle that first day. Now recovered from a recent illness, the colonel had become a regular visitor to schools participating in the Henderson Initiative. Young people, he told Tommy's class during one visit, sometimes think that heroes are people who do extraordinary things. But I want to tell you about a hero I met who was only 7 years old. His name is Tommy Henderson, and he taught me that the most heroic thing you can do is recognize the good in others. Tommy, now 8, and slightly embarrassed by the attention, but still proud of his father's memory, had grown more confident in speaking about loss and remembrance. When classmates faced their own family difficulties, they often sought him out for advice, somehow understanding that he had learned important lessons about coping with sadness while still celebrating what matters. The anniversary of David Henderson's death, which had always been the most difficult day of the year for Sarah and Tommy, had been transformed into something different. Instead of a day focused solely on loss, it had become a day of service to others. They volunteered at a local veterans shelter, Tommy helping serve meals while Sarah provided medical care to homeless former servicemen and women. During one of these volunteer sessions, they met Marcus Webb, a young veteran struggling with post-traumatic stress and homelessness. Marcus had seen Tommy's story online during a particularly dark period and credited it with inspiring him to seek help rather than give up entirely. "Your boy showed me that honoring service doesn't have to be complicated," Marcus told Sarah as Tommy carefully arranged food portions on plates nearby. "Just treating people with respect and dignity, that's everything." Marcus eventually became a regular visitor to their flat, joining them for Sunday dinners and helping Tommy with homework. What had started as a chance encounter at the volunteer center had grown into an extended family bond, proving once again that genuine connections could arise from the most unexpected circumstances. On the first anniversary of the Windsor Castle encounter, James Mitchell was granted special permission to meet the Henderson family at the exact spot where Tommy had first approached him. Local news cameras captured the reunion, but the real significance was personal. Tommy, now a confident 8-year-old, presented James with a new gift, a drawing he had made showing soldiers helping each other, inspired by his father's journal entries about the importance of looking after fellow servicemen. "Sergeant Mitchell," Tommy said with the same serious tone he had used a year earlier. "Daddy wrote in his journal that the best soldiers are the ones who remember that their job is to protect people. Thank you for protecting the memory of all the soldiers like my daddy." James accepted the drawing with the same ceremony he had shown for the medal, but this time he wasn't alone. Representatives from military charities, veteran organizations, and schools participating in the Henderson Initiative had gathered to witness what had become an annual moment of remembrance and renewal. As the ceremony concluded and the crowds dispersed, Sarah, Tommy, and James walked quietly around the castle grounds. The elaborate pageantry and media attention had faded, leaving just 3 people whose lives had been forever intertwined by a simple act of respect and recognition. "Doe, you think Daddy would be proud of what happened?" Tommy asked as they paused near the gate where it all began. "I think your father would be amazed," James replied, looking down at the boy who had grown several inches but retained the same earnest expression. "Not just proud, but amazed at how much good came from one brave decision to honor someone's service." Sarah squeezed her son's hand, thinking about the community of support they had found, the friendships they had built, and the healing that had come from sharing their story with others facing similar losses. "Daddy always said that the best way to honor the fallen is to take care of the living. I think we've done that, haven't we?" As they prepared to leave Windsor Castle that day, none of them could have known that their story would continue to inspire acts of kindness and recognition around the world. Letters arrived regularly from families who had been moved to reach out to veterans in their communities, schools that had started their own programs connecting students with military personnel, and individuals who had found the courage to honor their own family members' sacrifices. The viral moment that had begun with a 7-year-old's desire to give away his most precious possession had grown into something much larger than any of them had imagined. It had become a reminder that in a world often divided by differences, simple acts of respect and recognition could still bring people together in the most meaningful ways. Tommy Henderson, now walking confidently beside the guard who had honored his father's memory, carried with him not just the knowledge of his father's love found in the recovered journal, but the understanding that kindness and respect were forces powerful enough to change lives and connect strangers across all boundaries. The little boy who had once stood silently watching a Queen's Guard had grown into a young person who understood that true strength came not from standing alone, but from recognizing the worth in others and building bridges of understanding wherever possible. And in that understanding, David Henderson's legacy lived on, not just in his son's memory, but in the countless lives touched by one perfect moment of mutual respect between a soldier and the child of a fallen hero. The story that had begun with loss had become a celebration of connection, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes in the world start with the simplest gestures of human kindness.